White, and your moderator for this evening. The state legislative sessions across the country are coming to an end, with a number of issues being debated on and a lot of legislation being passed. So Fair Fight will be engaging with state legislators on the front lines through the Summer Town Hall series to learn more about the legislation that has come from legislative sessions in many states, as well as learning more about what we can potentially see next year during a critical election cycle. The role that state legislators play is vital because they have the opportunity to pass legislation that can improve the lives of individuals in their states or fight against harmful legislation. Since the 2020 election, states have seen a number of similar legislation brought to their chambers, including legislation that aims to address election administration, the rights of LGBTQ plus people, and in the wake of last year's Roe versus Wade reversal, legislation that addresses abortion access. This legislative session was especially important because it comes at a time where candidates are beginning to announce their bid for presidency and sway voters ahead of the 2024 election cycle. So tonight we will highlight the work that has been done, the work that is ongoing, and the work that is to come in 5 southern states. We are joined by Senator Derek Mallow of Georgia, Representative Anna Escamani of Florida, Representative Mandy Landry of Louisiana, Representative Latasha Jackson of Mississippi, and Senator Charlene Oliver of Tennessee. So we have a lot to cover this evening, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So since 2020, conservative majorities have made it their mission to pander to big lie conspiracies by unleashing a wave of different voter suppression bills. So Senator Derek Mallow, there were a few pieces of legislation that came up during this recent legislative session in Georgia that addressed issues relating to election administration, including Senate Bill 222. So can you tell us more about this bill and the impact that it's likely to have on counties across the state of Georgia?
So the state of Georgia likes to legislate elections, but we don't appropriate for elections. And what does that mean? That's unfunded mandates passed off to our counties throughout the state of Georgia. Georgia has 159 counties. Unlike many of the states, we are, I think, right behind Texas with the number of counties that we have. And so in more rural communities, they struggle with population, meaning they struggle with the taxing base and the ability to properly fund elections. And so this legislative session, I serve on the Ethics Committee in the Senate, and we debated one of many election bills that were pretty terrible. And this bill was to ban counties from accepting outside grant funding to help them administer elections. And so this bill was targeted at what they called Zuckerbucks. And so this was about DeKalb County receiving a grant, but then there was a Republican-dominated county that received the same grant and were very appreciative that they got the grant, and they had no interference. They got the grant to help administer the elections. And so we're so concerned about where money is coming from in our state, but we had a $2 billion surplus and none of that money went to elections. And in fact, the governor line item vetoed funding to help fund elections in Georgia. So to make it easier with new technology on poll pads so that check-in wouldn't be a devastating process. So in Georgia, we like to make it difficult for election administrative officials to administer elections, tie their hands on where they can get money from, and then say, you know what, we got a $2 billion surplus, but funding elections, not in this cycle, not in this budget. So think about it next time. We'll do something next time.
Thank you, Senator Mallow. So 2023 is an important election year for Mississippi, and the Mississippi State Legislature passed 2 voting bills that could shape the outcome, Senate Bill 2358 and House Bill 1310. So Representative Jackson, what exactly do these bills cover, and do you believe they will have a serious impact on the outcome of statewide elections in Mississippi this year?
Definitely. I want to definitely thank Fair Count for this timely conversation and just having us. Mississippi constituents and voters must be aware that we do have this legislation that's going to greatly impact our elections, and not only elections, but not this present election, but upcoming elections as well. So the very 2 bills that are being mentioned are referred to as the harvesting bill. And this piece of legislation was drafted as a measure to protect the voters from voter fraud and in election processes, so that individuals that are not able to receive the help from individuals that are not related to them as or designated caregivers to individuals with disabilities or elderly voters. So basically, where we've seen individuals that may be neighbors, friends, church members that will go around in our communities and help those individuals with their absentee ballots. This piece of legislation basically criminalized those individuals for being able to provide such assistance so that those bills are not harvested and mailed in by other individuals that are not considered to be either the direct caregiver of the disabled individual or the elderly individual that's the voter submitting the absentee ballot. And so we had a lot of efforts on the House floor to do our best to defeat this legislation. But of course, like our other southern states, in a supermajority, we were not able to defeat the bill. And this actually becomes law July 1. For those voters that have not voted or are not actively voting, the election commission usually have the discretion to purge our voter rolls. Well, now the Secretary of State has that authority to make sure that that is done if individuals are not actively voting. They're considered to be inactive and they'll be automatically purged from our voter rolls and not be able to participate in the election only by way of an affidavit. If that individual does not participate by an affidavit within 2 years, then that individual would be purged from the voter roll and would not be eligible to vote in that next upcoming election without re-registering to vote. So those are some of the tactics that are being done in Mississippi that we definitely see as voter suppression and that are not encouraging individuals and voters to actively be engaged and exercise their rights to vote.
Thank you, Representative Jackson. So I'm going to travel down the coast to Representative Anna Escamani. So Florida has been the talk of the country, especially in light of Governor DeSantis launching his presidential campaign last night. I think I don't know if they got the live stream to work. This week,
ours seems to work fine.
But this week, he also signed the omnibus voting bill, Senate Bill 7050. That just details like a lot of different new voting mandates. So can you explain more to us like what this large bill covers and the sort of impact that it can have on future elections in Florida?
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me too. And it's an honor to join my esteemed colleagues from across the South. Truly an honor, especially when you're in those tough states like Florida. Knowing you're not alone is an incredible comfort to have. So it's great to be with y'all. So yes, this omnibus election bill was probably best known for including the changes to resign to run. So for folks who don't know that context, Florida actually has a law where if you're going to run for another elected position as an incumbent that intercepts with your current term, you actually have to resign before you can do that. And of course, Governor DeSantis and the legislature that is Republican supermajority have changed the rule just for him. Basically, this bill had a last-minute amendment that will allow any elected official in Florida who is running for president or vice president to not have to follow that rule to run as they maintain another position. And so with that said, the bill, as you noted, included a lot more than just that. That got the most attention, but some of the most striking changes include major changes and new requirements to register people to vote. So not only is it targeting the act of voting, it's also targeting just the act of community grassroots organizations registering other people to vote. And as someone who actually manages what's called a third-party voter reg organization, we go to college campuses, we go to LGBTQ plus bars, we go to music festivals and concerts, we go to places where our government is not going to and doesn't really want you to go to, right? Because they don't want to register voters who are in some of these apolitical and also culturally diverse and youth-driven environments. So the new restrictions are along the lines of only U.S. citizens can collect voter registration forms. So if you have immigrants just volunteering with you, so maybe someone who has a visa, they can't collect forms anymore. It also goes after returning citizens and setting restrictions on which returning citizens can assist you in any voter registration initiative. Hefty, hefty fees involved in this, up to $50,000. It shortens the timeline of when we can turn in voter registration forms. It also creates a lot of confusion by adding new text to your voter registration card that says, this does not mean you're eligible to vote. And obviously that's incredibly confusing, for someone who registered to vote and gets his card in the mail. But really what this is designed to do is make it really scary for returning citizens, because if folks remember last year, Florida arrested several returning citizens who thought they were eligible to vote because they were given voter registration cards by the state. So this is, again, a legislature and the governor trying to abdicate responsibility by creating confusion and also putting that liability on the voter versus the state who processed their form in the first place. There are so many other changes in this bill, but I don't want to take up all the time, but it is going to affect our ability to register people to vote, which is what the majority party wants. They want to maintain the status quo. They don't want young people to start voting. They don't want diverse communities to start voting. So it really is an awful bill that was signed with very little fanfare because the governor signed it the day of his announcement, which was clearly on purpose.
Thank you, Representative Escamani. I'm going to go ahead and pivot over to Representative Landry, who is joining us live from the state capitol, Louisiana. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. So the Louisiana House has already seen a bill, House Bill 311, similar to the one in Georgia that addresses the use of donations to help fund elections. Louisiana also has statewide elections this year. So what impact will this bill have on the outcome of you all statewide election, if any? And are there any other, elections bills that you all have as you, approach sine die?
Yeah. So real quick, sorry I'm late. We're at the end. I think we just finished with bills and they're doing announcements. And yeah, we're still in crazy session. A lot more crazy maneuverings on anti-LGBT bills. The bill about banning. Sorry, it's been one of those days about banning the outside money. We first had it in 2020 during COVID. So there was I think it was Bill Gates money that they were giving to the clerks down here. And our Secretary of State was like, yeah, take it. Everyone take it. We need the money. And then, of course, my Attorney General, Jeff Landry, no relation, who is running for governor, we couldn't be more opposite in terms of politics. He got in on it, and it was the whole national, they're trying to take over our elections. So that's going to be the law by this fall. I don't know how much it's really going to affect anything because, we were looking forward to the Gates money before. But what we have in terms of voter issues is I'm pretty sure Louisiana and maybe Mississippi is going to be your test ground for challenging the presidential next year. We had this stupid recall. I'm not even going to get into the details in New Orleans, but what happened is it turned up there. Of course, there are people who are dead on the voter rolls. It happens. Of course, there's people who've moved out of district. And we think what they're doing is setting up challenges to challenge voters in New Orleans for our gubernatorial because the bad candidate, Jeff Landry, knows he's going to lose New Orleans by a landslide. So I think they're setting it up. They're not stupid. And however it goes, they'll probably use it in other areas of the country, which they're going to do anyway. But it's going to primarily be directed at majority Black, majority Democratic cities. So that's what we have gone on. Of course, having a statewide election in a off year is voter disenfranchisement just on its face. So that's kind of where we are. Happy to answer any further questions about it or anything else, but I'll stay on for the next question too.
So this is actually great. We're going to go ahead and pivot to sort of the way that each state has been addressing abortion access in the post-Roe reversal era. And so Representative Landry, I know you're still in the House. I'm going to throw this question to you first. So when Roe was overturned, a near total abortion ban kicked in Louisiana. So this year, bills have been introduced in Louisiana to sort of carve out exceptions or additional protections for patients and physicians. And I know you yourself introduced one as well. So can you tell us more about these bills and where they are in your legislature today?
They're all dead. They're all dead. We had a rape and incest exception, maternal health, fetal health. I had the canary bill. I got to a different committee, very quiet, that was just going to confirm that we're not going to throw women in jail who have an abortion, which all Right to Life orgs in all 50 states last year screamed from the rooftops they didn't want because it's politically unpopular. And the Right to Life group in Louisiana smushed it. They just killed it. It was really, really disappointing. And I do think we would have gotten at least a maternal health one through if it wasn't election year. But our criminal justice committee was purposely stacked for abortion issues and to roll back some CJR because it's election year too. And because New Orleans is just mired in violence right now. But for abortion stuff, it's bad for us. We're the furthest geographically from any clinic. Last I saw, Louisiana had I want to say the top 3 searches on Google for the abortion pill. That's kind of what we're pushing on people. Go to the website, call New York or California as soon as you test positive. But it's pretty hard, and we don't know the effects yet. I don't know if y'all knew we had a bunch of litigation that's still ongoing last year. So our state clinics were open, closed, open, closed. So we're still not really seeing. We're not seeing the most effects. We're seeing the dramatic cases, like one of Miss Davis. I forget her last name. She was told her baby was being born without a skull, and they would not perform an abortion, and she had to go to New York for it. A friend of mine from the Capitol was literally bleeding out at home. She already had a baby. She was bleeding out, and they wouldn't take her until she was almost septic. So we're hearing stories like that, but we're not hearing from people just on the ground with accidental pregnancies. So we don't really know what's happening yet. But if any of y'all have any insight into your states, maybe where the ban went in earlier, for other things we can do besides our little underground network of information. It's just really sad that we didn't pass the rape and incest exception, especially for the little ones. It's inexcusable, but I was not surprised.
Thank you, Representative Landry. And actually, I believe as of today, since South Carolina governor signed their 6-week ban, I believe Virginia is the last southern state that has not enacted a post-Roe ban. But I'm going to travel back down the coast to Representative Escamani.
I'm going to put y'all on mute for the next question, okay?
Okay. Yeah, so Representative Escamani, this legislative session, Florida also passed an extreme ban on abortion. So when does this law go into effect, and what has the response been like from the time the bill was introduced to now?
Well, like many of my fellow Southern states, abortion access has been under attack and has become a litmus test for conservatism. And in case folks didn't know this already, before I ran for office, I worked at Planned Parenthood of Southwest and Central Florida. So I carry a deep background in issues of reproductive health rights and justice, and have been a firm advocate for abortion rights since before I ran for the state house. And the fall of Roe with the Dobbs decision has been absolutely devastating for those of us in the South, with Florida kind of being this safe space for about a year because the states around us were banning abortion, but Florida has a strong right to privacy in our state constitution, which has actually stopped some of the worst abortion bans in the country from being mimicked in Florida. Unfortunately, as everyone knows, we have a Republican state majority in both our chambers. We have a Republican governor running for president. And of course, we have a much more conservative state Supreme Court. So before the fall of Roe, we had a 15-week abortion ban that was passed into law that is being litigated, with the first judge actually stating clearly that it is unconstitutional under Florida's right to privacy. That did not stop the state from appealing that decision. That case is still being litigated right now. And what took place this last session that ended on May 5th was a 6-week abortion ban that the governor signed into law the night it came to his desk into a private invite-only audience at his office, which is another example of not only how just gross DeSantis really is, but how he knows this is unpopular, and his signature in implementing this law is very much driven by his own political ambition. So not what's in the best interest of Florida, but what's in the best interest of his political career. With that point made, the 6-week abortion ban does not go into effect until 30 days after there's a decision on the 15-week abortion ban, assuming they override that right to privacy and allow 15 weeks to stay. Since then, we have been busy here in Florida. We actually launched on May 8th a ballot initiative to get abortion access codified in our state constitution. This is Floridians Protecting Freedom. The website is floridiansprotectingfreedom.com. And we are focused on collecting upwards of 1.3 million signatures by February to get this on the ballot. And we do feel confident when given the chance, Florida voters will codify abortion rights so we can circumvent the legislature and ensure access to reproductive health and freedom is a reality for everyone who calls Florida home and everyone who comes to Florida for abortion care, because we have seen a huge influx from states like Georgia, like Louisiana, like Texas, because Florida does have more access compared to our fellow southern states.
Thank you, Representative Escamani. We'll definitely be following, the litigation in Florida. I'm going to pivot again. So there has been a serious culture war being waged, by the conservatives, mainly targeting LGBTQ plus people, specifically trans people and youth. So Senator Derek Mallow, this year, Georgia Republicans introduced and passed a ban on gender affirming care for trans youth. So what was it like to just hear the testimonies, from families and even from some of your colleagues in the well? I know there were a lot of state legislators who went to the well to speak on this issue.
It was a very challenging time, actually. One of my colleagues in the Senate has a child who had been transitioning, and she went through it very personally. And having served with the senator and knowing her family's struggles with this and what she went through as a parent, first, not as a senator, but as a parent who lived it. It was a very different experience that folks who don't know anything about anything, number one, they live in small communities that don't even have an OBGYN, they don't have a hospital, they don't have a doctor, they don't even have a news station, but they got all the facts on what the rest of the state needs. And so that process was very tiring, it was very challenging this session. And my colleague, Senator Kim Jackson, went to the well, just said, would you just leave the puberty blockers in the bill so that those children can have access to the medication that they need. And even then, that was taken out. Even making it a crime if doctors provided gender affirming care, that was added in the bill against physicians. The physicians came out against it. So we don't want to be held criminally liable. We have immunity. Why are you doing that? And so again, this Republican majority in the state of Georgia, they don't care. It's about a cultural war, what fires back up to their base, regardless of how it hurts people or who it hurts or what may happen. I mean, they just pushed it through and they sent it to the governor and he signed it immediately. And so our governor's not running for higher office yet, but you can tell that he's pandering and positioned himself to do that because some of these bills he could have easily vetoed. He's on his last term as governor. He doesn't have to pass them. He doesn't have to sign them. He said he's not running for president or higher office. So why don't you just veto the bad legislation and have a backbone in the spine, and let's think about things very thoughtfully. So trans kids were definitely hurt. They came to the Capitol, they protested, but with the GOP majority that we have in Georgia, you can protest all you want. They don't care because they go back to their small rural communities who don't know about the things that they're doing because they're isolated. They don't hear what's happening in Atlanta. There's no telegram back to some of these smaller communities, so they get to do so much legislatively that I think if their home districts knew how they were voting, they would vote against them in the next election.
Thank you, Senator Mallow. I'm going to come over to Senator Charlene Oliver. So Tennessee, I've seen a lot of articles, but Tennessee is said to be leading the nation when it comes to passing discriminatory bills that target the LGBTQ plus community. So Senator Oliver, what bills were passed this legislative session and what has been the response from the progressive community in Tennessee?
Yes, thank you, Kristen, for having me. Tennessee doesn't get a lot of news unless we do something really, really bad. And one of the things we did we did a lot of things bad this year, but the first thing on the agenda was to target the LGBTQ plus community. And this started last fall when there was a fake article that came out that was pushed by the Republicans that Vanderbilt University Medical Center had a gender affirming care clinic, operating on trans youth without parental consent, which proved to be not true. But they used that fake news as leverage to pass LGBTQ anti-hate bills, basically. And the first bill, Senate Bill 1, was our ban on gender affirming care for trans minors. And the second thing we did was pass a bill to ban drag show performances. So we lumped in, unfortunately, drag performers with strippers and sex workers and those who deemed that to be obscene. And so this was Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 3 in Tennessee that we banned, but now those bills immediately were challenged in court. So it is now under litigation, thankfully. So we saw a lot of those types of bills. The third thing we did was we challenged the word sex in our Constitution and codified it in another part of the code so that we could challenge Title IX federally, which now puts us in jeopardy of receiving those types of funds, federal funding. So we did a lot this year to really, again, incite violence on our LGBTQ plus community. We know that, we have groups like the Proud Boys here in Tennessee who show up at drag show performances with their AR-15s and their guns. We're open carry state. So this is a real threat to people's lives to be able to walk freely and be themselves. But here in Nashville, we welcome everybody. We welcome all walks of life and celebrate Nashville as a diverse community. And so we push back on that. We held rallies and made sure that we made our voices heard in the legislature this year to push back on these hate bills.
Thank you, Senator Oliver. I'm coming back over to Representative Escamani, and I just want to thank you and all of the progressive state legislators in Florida. I know you all had such an interesting legislative session that just wrapped up, and I feel like I keep coming to you, but so much has happened in Florida. So Florida, has passed a number of bills targeting the LGBTQ plus community.
Right.
So can you tell us about these bills a little bit more and sort of similar question, like how the progressive community has been responding?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I appreciate you noting too that it is a community, right? Because I am definitely not alone. And when it comes to fighting these battles, though the Democratic caucus is small, we are mighty. And I want to give a special shout out to Representative Michelle Rander Goolsby, who is the first ever Black queer lawmaker in Florida history who identifies as a woman. And she is so incredibly fierce. She is a champion for her district and for impacted communities. And this was a very painful legislative session for a lot of us too, because it was mentioned by Senator Mallow, having lawmakers that have trans kids. We have a senator whose granddaughter is trans. And of course, in my district, it's home to Pulse nightclub. And so we are directly impacted by the violence that we see perpetuated towards LGBTQ plus people. And of course, this terminology of calling those who identify as LGBTQ plus or those who are allies as groomers is out of control. Like, it is disgusting. It is distracting from legitimate groomers. And of course, is designed to just further create vitriol and violence towards a community that has been marginalized in the entirety of American history alongside so many marginalized communities. And so I get really frustrated, with this rhetoric. And we saw in Orlando, the area that I represent, someone hacked a traffic sign that said, "Kill all gays." And of course, on top of that, we've also seen white supremacists literally sign waving, doing banner drops, and their rhetoric is not only homophobic and transphobic, but it's also obviously anti-Semitic and clearly racist. And so I share that context because it's not even just what happened in the legislature. We're seeing the ripple effect in our communities, and people are scared, people are frustrated. And our governor, Ron DeSantis, signed 4 anti-LGBTQ plus bills in one day. 4. I mean, it's absurd. Restriction on drag shows. Florida has done that. A lawsuit was just filed. Absolutely absurd. Um, an expansion of the Don't Say Gay Trans bill, allowing for more book banning, passed, signed into law. Legislation regarding bathroom usage. So now people cannot even pee in peace. They're going to be targeted by their perceived gender when they use the restroom. And then finally, the ban on gender affirming care, which in our case specifically targets not just children accessing care, but it also does target adults. It strips away the ability for nurse practitioners to provide gender affirming care, which is having a devastating effect in Florida because many of the providers are not MDs, DOs, they are nurse practitioners. And so now we're scrambling to figure out, what can we do to make sure that patients don't lose access to care while helping those that are now either going to have to leave the state or travel for care be able to do that. So it's incredibly devastating. We are doing rapid response work and trying to raise funds. We have a new trans emergency fund in Central Florida managed by the LGBTQ plus Center of Orlando and the Contigo Fund. We also, of course, have networks being established among different providers, but it's a very scary time and an unnecessary agenda because no, I've never had a constituent call me and say, can you please do this, right? We have constituents calling us on housing affordability issues, the cost of rent, issues when it comes to, the quality of their schools. We don't get people who contact us to do these things.
Thank you, Senator Escamani. And Senator Oliver, you actually mentioned something earlier about how Tennessee is an open carry state and how, there have been people showing up to drag shows with, AR-15s, trying to intimidate. And so this is actually a good segue because in addition to Florida, Tennessee also caught national headlines this previous legislative session when 3 members of the state house were expelled after supporting protesters who called for common sense gun reform in the wake of another school shooting that claimed the lives of children. So Senator Oliver, what was it like, during this time, and what can people do to support you all as you prepare for your special legislative session later this year?
Yeah, it was pretty surreal, to be honest. So to give you some context, myself and Representative Justin Jones, Representative Justin Pearson, all come from a community organizing background, and we all came in as freshmen together. My district and Representative Justin Jones's districts overlap. He's in the House, I'm in the Senate. And when we came in, the culture that was bestowed upon us was what was told to us is the House operates kind of like a boys' high school locker room, and the Senate operates like a retirement home because there's so many white men in the Senate. I think when I got elected, I certainly lowered the average age of the Senate for sure. And so our chambers operate totally different and separate from each other. And so on that particular day that the protest happened, we were having our first protest right after the Covenant mass shooting. And prior to this, me and Justin sort of had this camaraderie that, we stuck together. He would come in my office a lot. And this bullying that was happening was constantly happening when we came into the door because he had already had this reputation as an agitator, as an activist. He had already had a name for himself. So they knew out the gate coming in, they never wanted Representative Justin Jones in the body. So the expulsion was just the thing that they were looking for as an excuse to get rid of him. And so that day that it happened, he had came into my chambers while we were voting and said, hey, they just tried to kick me out because of the pen I was wearing, which was a pen, the Band AR-15 pen that has a line through it. Whereas a lot of the white members wear Confederate flag ties. They wear pins with AR-15s on them, even though the House rules say that you can't bring in props to promote or oppose legislation. So there was already this double standard happening. And so when the protests happened, there was a lot of scurry and talk. They went to recess, immediately saying, we're going to expel them. We thought it was going to happen. The motion was going to happen the same day. But thankfully, we had some time to react to that. And it was just awful. It was blatant racism at its finest. It was what we already knew Tennessee General Assembly was. They hate to be called racist. It triggers them to no end, but they constantly do racist things. And we had been fighting back and pushing back for years. And thankfully, the protests of the Tennessee Three shined a light nationally on what has been going on in building since the GOP took over the supermajority in 2010. So, that caused us to rally around gun reform. And thankfully, the governor, he was moved by that. We were not having a gun conversation before the Covenant shooting in the legislature that year. Every single gun bill that was brought was to make it easier and make the gun laws more lax here. We were even talking about lowering the age from 21 to 18 to carry a handgun. When the shooting happened, we paused all of those bills. But the one bill that we managed to pass this year was to make it harder for individuals to file a lawsuit against gun manufacturers. So there was no legislation, unfortunately, to protect the victims of the Covenant shooting, to bring strengthen more restrictions around people who are looking to harm themselves or others. And the governor did bring an ERPO bill, which is a somewhat of a red flag law. It was a pretty watered down bill. It did not have a strong ex parte clause in there. It did not allow for family members, which is something that I wanted, to report and petition to the court to have their guns taken away. So now the governor has called a special session for August 21st, and we need the entire nation to not let up. The same thing that happened with the Tennessee expulsion, a Tennessee 3 expulsion, we need that same support across the country. We need people to come back to the legislature and put pressure on these folks. We've already had 3 members call for the governor to cancel the special session. But listen, they know they're outnumbered, and they know that these are their voters that are calling for this gun reform. Over 80% of Tennesseans support common sense gun reform, whether it's background checks, whether it's a red flag law, whether it's tighter restrictions on permitless carry and other things like that. And these were suburban Republican mothers that were coming to the Capitol. These weren't just activist protesters or whatever they wanted to frame it as. These were children. These were clergy. These were grassroots organizers, people coming to the Capitol saying, look, this from rural and urban areas saying this has to stop. So we're hoping that we're reaching a breaking point and we can actually get something meaningful passed with Democratic votes in the special session.
Thank you, Senator Oliver. I know that was a really surreal time for you all. And I remember checking in with you that day. I'm going to go over to Mississippi. Representative Jackson, Mississippi passed bills this legislative session addressing guns, but particularly one that would allow teachers to arm themselves. And I hate I have to ask you this question, but is this the right response? And if not, what is the negative impact that this type of legislation could have?
Well, definitely it's not the right response. Having a gun in a classroom to defend against an agitator or for whatever reason is not the right response as we're looking at gun control and gun violence within our schools. House Bill 2079 is the bill that you're referring to. I'm sorry, Senate Bill 2079 is the bill that you're referring to. And this piece of legislation basically states that the teachers will go through a training process where they'll have the training and a licensing process so that they are well equipped in the event that there is some type of school active shooter within the campus of any schools, and they can be reactive in the situation. But we also know that there are a lot of mental challenges with students in schools. And I'm not even going to defer to say that it could be a student that's actually in the classroom that could be a target for a incident with a loaded gun in the room or in the classroom. I don't even want to think of the hypothetical situations as I did, sitting on the floor with my other colleagues as we debated this bill and felt what all common sense thinkers would think, that this would not be the logical response that we, the state of Mississippi, would enact to combat gun violence in school and to address those issues. But again, in a supermajority state, we had no avail to defeat the legislation. But as stated in earlier comments, having eyes on all legislative sessions basically help us, as we are being able to vocally fight on the legislative floor and debate these different bills, having individuals out from the outside media being able to help us bring the awareness to what's happening and what's being discussed and what's being legislated so that we can bring some contrast to the rhetoric and the narratives, help us in our legislative quest to be able to see more progressive legislation and less legislation that provides the safety that we're all wanting to see.
Thank you, Representative Jackson. Representative Escamani, again, thank you all so much for the work you did to combat everything that came out of the Florida legislative session this year. So on the list of extreme priorities for conservatives in Florida were looser gun restrictions. So what has been the response to some of the gun bills that have been passed in the legislature in Florida?
Well, the biggest change we saw this year that actually passed was the shift to permitless carry in Florida. So right now you can purchase that firearm without any type of training whatsoever, which of course is very concerning as we already have some of the most lax gun laws in the country. And the notion of a good guy with a gun becomes even less real when that good guy doesn't have any training. So it's just really unsettling, really a lot of pushback, even from gun owners. But of course, the bill still pushed through. I will say one silver lining that we had to kind of echo what is going on in other states too is our governor wanted to change the age limit to buy rifles back to 18. So for some context, we actually, before I was in the legislature, after the tragedy of Parkland, the school shooting at Martyrstone Douglas High School led to an omnibus gun safety, school safety legislation. And a part of that included raising the age to purchase assault rifles, other types of rifles from 18 to 21. And Governor Ron DeSantis wanted to bring it back down to 18, again, for his own presidential ambitions. The Florida House passed that measure, but the Senate did not. So at least for now, we did not see that change happen. I'm very concerned that next session, we're going to see open carry in Florida. We still don't have open carry, but I think that's going to come next. I filed, alongside many other Democrats, amendments to the permitless carry bill to try to put into place safety measures, background checks, and everything else that is common sense, including community gun violence prevention strategies. I also filed an amendment to help reduce suicide attempts by guns. And of course, those amendments failed. I also filed an amendment to allow guns in committee rooms and meetings of the legislature, because ironically, despite the fact that my Republican colleagues think that guns make us all more safe and we have them, they don't want them in the committee room. They don't want them in the chamber. They don't want them in the hallways. And so I figured, okay, well, let's test your values on this. Let's see if you agree that we should have guns in our committee rooms. And of course, that amendment also failed. And it was a really interesting moment because members of the like gun rights community actually thanked me for that, which I had to remind folks, like, I'm not your hero in that regard, but they were also frustrated by what they see as hypocrisy, by the Republican Party. And it's incredibly frustrating when you have bills that are not really even ideologically driven. Like, I don't know if all my colleagues believe in these policies. They just see it as a means of their path to power, right? And so that's what drives them. They can't prove to us that it's going to make us more safe. They don't have any strong defense of these policies. Some are hardcore Second Amendment, and that's how they interpret it, and that's how they're going to be. But it's clear that many just go along because they see it as advantageous to their political careers, not because it actually is good policy or in the best interest of community safety.
And speaking of passing legislation that is in the best interest of political careers, I'm going to turn it back over to Senator Mallow in Georgia, because this legislative session, we actually saw a bill that decided to take aim at progressive district attorneys that would establish a prosecutorial oversight committee. So Senator Mallow, can you tell us more about this legislation and sort of the impact that it will have and why voters should be concerned about this?
This 2020 election, lot of and so these women were elected, they decided to change course.
Senator Mallow, I think we're having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So what happened with this bill was basically to rein in rogue prosecutors who said we're not going to prosecute nonviolent crimes. So petty marijuana possession charges, other simple crimes, they're not going to prosecute them. Handling, we're not going to prosecute them. They fill up our jails. And ironically enough, we also have a Republican sheriff in Chatham County, in the city that I represent, a state senator, who also had the same policy. He didn't hold misdemeanors in the jail. He let you loose. Don't bring a misdemeanor to my jail, is what he said. So he and the district attorney had the same policy standpoint, but my district attorney got beat up, and they used this bill to restrict basically her having a recall. There's a recall provision in that. There is a prosecutorial oversight council that will review complaints to prosecutors who will be appointed by the governor and basically all the branches of government and Republicans control. So they're in static effect in this committee, and they have to review these road attorneys. But I would remind everybody when Ahmaud Arbery was killed in Brunswick, Georgia, and Jackie Johnson was the prosecutor in Glynn County who didn't do a job. George Barnhill and Waycroft didn't prosecute. All of them were fine, and nothing has happened. Jackie Johnson hadn't go before yet, didn't see anything in court. So the hypocrisy from the Republican majority about oversight and road prosecutors, they should have been doing that when this young man was murdered in broad daylight. But they weren't pushing prosecutorial oversight when Jackie Johnson and George Barnhill refused to do their job. So we just have to really work to address some of these issues moving forward. Now I'm going to work on the sound thing, so I appreciate y'all.
Thank you. Representative Jackson, Mississippi actually passed a measure that has been criticized as an effort to take over Jackson and disenfranchise its voters. And actually, someone described it to me as sort of establishing a city within a city. And so so what exactly is this measure, this takeover effort of Jackson, and why should everyone be paying attention to this?
So this legislative session, we saw several bills in effort to take over various administrative departments within the city of Jackson. But I think the one that got the most outrage was House Bill 1020. So many people refer to it as a Jim Crow law currently in Mississippi in 2023 because of the initiative to expand what's called the Capital Complex Improvement District, CCID. And this particular measure was actually is a progressive piece of legislation. So prior to this legislative session, we had legislation to form what's called the Capital Complex Improvement District. And that's basically the area of the Mississippi Capital area that's within the city of Jackson. Certain communities that are in the boundaries of the capital that are considered to be the most affluent or the most progressive areas for your entertainment spaces, restaurants that surround the capital, but that are not considered to be the areas where a lot of minorities actually live within the city of Jackson. So that's why it's seen as a separate court system for Jackson residents that are not in a South or West Jackson. So just to give you some demographic reference there. So basically what would happen with the legislation, we would expand that district to cover more areas that reflect a more diverse or a more majority of Caucasian residents within the city of Jackson. And within that, whatever crime or whatever activity happened, it would be policed by a separate policing department, which would be the Capitol Police, would actually have the policing authority to police that particular area. And in the event someone is actually charged with a crime in that area, they would actually go before a separate court. Now, this court system would be designed and appointed. So this is an appointed court system where individuals are not being able to favor and elect the prosecutors or elect the judges that are a part of this court system. Public defenders are even assigned, and in this makeup, police would have the discretion, because they do not have an adequate jail, they would have the discretion to even house individuals that have been charged in our state prisons. So we had a lot of debate on the floor regarding this legislation, because we felt, of course, that this bill had not been properly vetted. To be able to say that we're going to charge an individual and then possibly house them in a state prison with individuals with more stricter crimes within the state is asinine. So the bill goes beyond the scope of just expanding security and policing arms within the area. And in addition to that, we also looked at who's going to train these officers. Where will the oversight for these different police officers come from as well, in the event that there is a grievance and the conduct with these officers, etc. Well, none of this was addressed in the bill. And the biggest pushback that we're saying as Mississippians, we know this: when it's done in Mississippi, and it easily becomes the roadmap for other states where there are high crime or high Black poverty rates within a particular city. Jackson is one of the largest populations in cities within the state of Mississippi where Black African Americans actually live. So we're looking at arming our colleagues in other states to say, hey, be on notice, because again, if Mississippi is able to do it, we very well think other states may look to us and say, this works, let us do the same in other states. So we are wanting individuals to definitely support the efforts in combating this legislation. Currently, this legislation is in federal court. We knew that it would be challenged, but again, that's spending taxpayers' dollars to fight legislation that we legislators have not completely vetted and assured as a right protocol to be able to address crime or to be able to address the issues that we are looking to address in outcomes with the legislation.
Thank you, Representative Jackson. Representative Landry, are you with us?
Yep. Just got to my car. How are y'all?
Hi. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. I know you've been in session for hours. Yes, so Louisiana Republicans actually just recently announced that the Republican National Committee will be working with them to conduct a large voter integrity operation after failed attempts to recall the mayor of New Orleans and claims of inactive voters. So why should the country be paying attention to this, to Louisiana, and especially Louisiana elections this year?
As I said a little bit earlier, for those of you just tuning in, I think us in Mississippi are going to be the canary in that vote challenge coal mine. We had this weird recall process of our mayor, and it was run by Republicans behind the scene, and a few angry Democrats, and they were smart. They sent out, they got enough money to send out the recall petition to sign, and of course a bunch got returned. All of you have run for office. So many of your mail pieces get returned. I mean, people move, people just don't update their addresses, and of course this became like this witch hunt for all the people who, they said they moved 20-30 years ago. Well, I mean, of course there's going to be some people in the rolls, they can't be perfect. It needs to be updated. We have a canvas once a year, but they are going to use that, and they are using it specifically in Orleans, and probably will also use it in Baton Rouge and Shreveport, your predominantly Black areas, to challenge all voters in those areas and say, like, well, you can't trust the registrar for any of these voters. And I saw that our state GOP said they were going to help. I did not see, is it the RNC?
So I believe I saw the tweet. I believe they said that the Republican National Committee convention would be, I guess, assisting them or helping them, conduct a large scale voter integrity operation in Louisiana this year.
Okay. Because I saw our state party did, who very early endorsed and is helping the current attorney general who's running for governor, Jeff Landry. That's our Trump, our DeSantis, if you will, in Louisiana. And so I know they'll be helping him. Interesting. I haven't been hearing much about any of that since I've been in session. It's been kind of quiet. I would say the majority of your Republican elected officials don't like him at all. He's a loose cannon. He's too Trumpy. I mean, Trump did win Louisiana, but we're not really like that. There's a small part of us. They got in this business guy. There's the treasurer in it, and more Republicans are trying to go the other way because they see things like this and don't like it. But I actually haven't heard much about voter integrity issues. There's like those couple of bills here, but that's quieted down since 2020. But I do think keep your eyes on us in October and November. I think there's going to be a lot going on with challenging voters, and it'll probably start in August after qualifying, so they can start on some early challenges.
Thank you, Representative Landry. And one final question for you as a follow-up. I know we've mentioned a few times that Louisiana has an election this year. So what can people do to support the progressive community in Louisiana leading up to the November election?
So there's only a few of us who are progressive. The right-wing rags have named me Louisiana AOC, and they called me mail-in Mandy during COVID because I had a bill that I filed for mail-in voting, and I said, put it on my gravestone. So there's only a handful of us in the legislature. I can send y'all some information on that. But we have a few groups, two in particular, that are very good about statewide voter registration, trying to, help individuals in those areas, quietly trying to help some moderate Republicans in our worst areas. And one is the Power Coalition, and they're almost exclusively voter registration and outreach. And the other is called Vote, Voters Organized to Educate. It was started and mostly run by formerly incarcerated, and they do a lot of work on criminal justice issues, but they've been getting involved in some campaigns. They endorsed me, they endorsed a few others, their C4 or whatever it is. But those are two groups that are very much on the ground, from the ground up, like your good progressives, like someone like me who didn't know a single person in politics and just knocked doors. And so we have a few groups like that. Our governor's race, I'll get back to you. I don't know what's going to happen on that. It may be a choice between Republican and Republican. But you're all in the South too. And sometimes we have to make those decisions about who we're going to vote for. And I think people are getting used to it. But power and vote, and I'll send you the information if you want to send it around,
our two good groups, and then there's a handful of us in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Shreveport who are pushing out there. So I'm going to keep listening. I'm going to drive to my house here, but I really appreciate the questions. And I was listening still on the floor, y'all. I wish Louisiana had some of the organized pushback that y'all have. There's just so few of us, and I would love to learn more from some of y'all. And Texas, if we can get Texas in here, they're crazy out there. So thank you.
Thank you again, Representative Landry. And similar question to Representative Jackson, because Mississippi also has statewide elections this year, this November. So what can people do to support you all? Yeah.
So voter engagement, voter education, registration, and helping assist us with those inactive voters, with those grassroots organizations that are, sending out information, educating the individuals on the different laws that have passed where they may be purged effective July 1 in the upcoming election is really important for us to make sure those individuals have that information, being able to understand how political this all things are, so that voters are educated about the issues in Mississippi are really important. So just having conversations like this, where we're able to meet people where they are from a media standpoint, be it social media or whatever a platform it may be, to be able to engage, educate, and push people to the polls. We're seeing in the current polling that Mississippians are looking for change and wanting to see change and more progression within the state, and have some concerns because of our COVID funds and the way that they were expensed and the way our leadership enacted during COVID. So being able to stick to the issues that matter to the people and singing from the same sheet music or narrative as all of us will definitely help us engage Mississippians and keep the momentum that we need on election day. So again, thank you, Fair Account, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Representative Jackson. And Representative Escamani, just one final question for you as well. I've been seeing, discourse on social media where people essentially say, forget Florida, kind of want to cut Florida off. And I think we experienced that a lot, being from southern states where, people up north or in the West or even from other southern states sort of want to write us off. And so I would love for you to just speak to why that's, not really the position to take, and then also how people can support you all in Florida as you continue to fight the good fight.
Absolutely. I mean, Florida is worth fighting for. And I'm born and raised in this state, daughter of immigrants who came to this country in search of the American dream. And what keeps me motivated are the folks who need us to do this work. I mean, everyday people that don't even know who their elected officials are, but are impacted by the decisions they make. Like, it's our job to ensure that they have fighters and allies and advocates and folks looking out for them. And as hard as it is, it's always worth it to be in that position of service. And the reason why Florida is worth investing in, look at the most recent elections we've had. I mean, Jackson, Duval County, which is, part of Florida South, if you will. I mean, we had Democrats win up and down the ticket there. It was incredible. And, very much a hyper-local campaign speaking to Democratic values, and complete shift in the power structure in Jacksonville and Duval County. And our candidates were outspent, but they were not outworked, and they shined, focusing on issues that solve everyday problems. So that gives me a lot of hope. I think the ballot initiative work I mentioned earlier on abortion access has so much great momentum and excitement. And that not only is that going to help us secure abortion rights, but it's going to be a turnout tool to really inspire people who might not typically see their vote counting. In this case, it's a clear black and white example of why it does. And of course, every strategy takes time. And, I look towards Georgia as inspiration every day. Look at 2 Democratic senators in Georgia. And of course, we know at the state legislature, we obviously have so much more work to do, but it's that slow and steady burn that we can't overlook to get us to our goal. And I remind myself every day that for the anti-abortion extremists, it took them 50 years to overturn Roe. And in that time frame, they had many losses, but they never stopped. They kept going. And we really have to mimic not just that same level of focus, but more, right? And realize that what has taken us generations to build, that's now being stripped away from us, it's not going to take us one night to get it back. And so we got to keep the pace, bring in more people to support this work, inspire a bench to be built. But Florida is so unique. We really are 3 different states in one. And as our demographics shift, our values, my hope will continue to focus on the freedom to be healthy, safe, and prosperous. And as long as we can champion that and prove that to people, then I still have a lot of hope in Florida.
Thank you, Representative Escamani. And Senator Mallow and Senator Oliver, one final question for you both as well. Similar to the question for Representative Escamani, what do you say to people who sort of want to write off Georgia or write off Tennessee or just the South in general? And what can people do to support you all moving forward as you continue to fight the good fight and fight some of the worst bills, especially going into an election year?
I'm going to just say we're going to raise awareness, and we're going to meet people where they are. And we're going to speak truth to power and just call out the hypocrisy of what's actually happening and not talk over people, right? So I think sometimes in politics, we talk over people where we speak at very intellectual and college-educated words, and the average voter doesn't quite understand that. So we need to bring the message back down and keep it real simple, just like the GOP is doing. They speak to very politicized, hyper-political, cultural war issues. When we talk to voters, we just need to tell them the bedrock of democracy is on the line, and we need you to stand shoulder to shoulder with us because this is what's happening. I'm thankful to my colleagues in Tennessee because I got a lot of phone calls in Georgia that said they can put y'all out. I didn't know they can put y'all out. We voted for y'all, and so we actually read our rule book to find out that they don't have a supermajority. It takes a 2/3 vote to remove a member. So we can protect ourselves, and so. If it wasn't for Tennessee, we would have never looked that up to see what the powers were and what our punishment could be for similar action. And so now we know what could happen and what's the rules and the decorum of the House and the Senate. And so we're appreciative of that work. So if we could all just stand shoulder to shoulder, travel to our sister states, and if Rep. Jackson is out working in Mississippi, I want to be there. Rep. Escamani is working in Florida, I want to be there. Senator Oliver is working in Tennessee, I want to find a way to be there, because if we don't support each other, we're going to be in trouble, because they travel, the members of the GOP, to each of these states, and they peddle the same agenda back and forth. But if we're not unified across the state lines to know what happened in Tennessee and what's happening in Mississippi, we'll miss it. Because I'm sure in Atlanta, they will try to figure out to do what they just did in Jackson, to figure out how to take over the city of Atlanta. So we got to be watchful of that, and thankful that you share that so we can be looking out. So let's just stand together in solidarity, but not with lip service, but actual action, and make sure we back up what we say.
Yeah, Tennessee, it can be a very depressing and dismal landscape to look at, but I stay encouraged because even though Tennessee is the birthplace of the KKK, it is also one of the places that had the strongest student nonviolent movement in the civil rights era. So there has been a history of pushback, a history of making sure that we do what's morally right when the moment calls for it. And so, my ancestors didn't fight this fight for me to sit down. The arc of justice is long. And so I am encouraged that we will continue to stay in this fight. And we're looking for more fighters. We need more people to run. Even though Tennessee is this year, we don't have state elections. We have mayoral races. We have municipal city council races going on. We need people to run on every level up and down the ballot. It's time to get in the fight and not continue to look to just the few, but everyone has a place in this movement, and find that place. Not only just running for office, it's time to organize and band together. We're in our silo pockets, whether it might be the LGBTQ movement or the Black Lives Matter or the Refugee Rights Coalition movement. It's now time to band together for this multiracial coalition, because when they come for one, they come for all of us. And it's now, we've seen that in this authoritarian government that we have here in Tennessee. And find a place to plug in. I guarantee you there is an organization, a grassroots organization. If you don't have one, come to the Equity Alliance. It's the organization that I founded. And so there are places to plug in, and we just need people to keep the energy, keep what's going on, and find something to do. Voting right now, I hate to say this, is not enough, right? Just voting. We need people to get actively engaged and coming to the legislature. So, and fundraise. Some of the things that one of the things that I hated that we couldn't do during legislative session while the whole Tennessee 3 expulsions were happening, we can fundraise. By law, we're not allowed to fundraise during legislative session. So as regular citizens and regular people, everyday people, there are things that you can do that we can't as legislators. And so fundraising, creating a legal defense fund, a lot of these bills end up in court, but there are organizations and groups that can't afford to challenge these laws. And so maybe that's something that you can do. So there are multiple ways that you can find to get involved. And I just encourage people to stay encouraged and stay in the fight and continue and know that this is a long game that we're playing. Like Representative Escamani said it perfectly, that we will be here and we are going to flip Tennessee. Just give us a little time.
Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, sharing your insight with us and some of the things that have been going on in your states. I know everyone probably feels just as fired up as I feel after listening to all of you. One of the organizations you can tap in with, Fair Fight. Hey, we're here in Georgia doing the good work. And there are a lot of other amazing organizations here in Georgia as well. Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana. So again, thank you all so much, and catch us next month in June where we talk to some of the state legislators out west, the Midwest, and the Southwest. And so with that, I will bid you all good night.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.